Hey, I'm Nick from Kinetic, and thanks for checking out our new series From the Floor. One of our goals at Kinetic is general industry education. So we wanted to put together this series to highlight some different brokers and talk about, just some best practices, common mistakes, general brokering advice. Today I have Josh from LGI. Josh, thanks for being on, man. I'll do a quick intro.
Yeah. Nick, appreciate the time and the invite. My name is Josh Cale, Vice President of Operations with Logistics Group International in Houston, Texas. Been in the industry for 10 years, sat in multiple different seats, and freight is in my blood, and I'm excited to be here and chat with you for a little bit.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being on. So today we want to talk about some of the nuances of like winning and managing contractual business. And like as I'm saying that, I recognize this is something we can talk about for hours. So we're just going to cover up a few things that come up a lot. First, like in general, how do you approach bids? Like, do you quote everything, or do you take a more targeted approach to it?
Sure. So I think it is always a targeted approach. And what that means is, you'll have RFPs with thousands and thousands of lanes on it, right? You need to look in your network, within your team, and understand what you're good at, what you're not good at. Because customers, they don't want paper rates. They don't want you to bid everything. That is a losing battle. And a customer that sees that you bid on everything, they're probably going to look at you and say, okay, well, we're going to look actually deeper into these rates because in all actuality, they're probably paper rates, right? So yes, take a targeted approach, pick out, a percentage of lanes that you're good at. And there's multiple ways to skin a cat. You can go to your carrier sales team, your sourcing team, and see what pricing is. There's multiple ways, but I think the targeted approach of whatever you're doing within the RFP is most important, and not bidding everything. And then you can really start to get granular on the rates and see where you might be able to provide solutions for the customer instead of just putting rates based on averages. Look and see what you've moved it for, who you've moved it with, see if they have capacity, see if they like those lanes, see if they, you're only utilizing, a tenth of their fleet, right? That's important, because if you can utilize someone's whole fleet, then you can really maybe drill down on prices. And that's a solution for a customer at the end of the day, if they are price sensitive. So the targeted approach is very important, and not bidding everything.
Yeah, no, that's a great approach to it. And you use the term paper rates, and like I know what that means. You know what that means. But for people who might be new to the industry, let me just ask you to clarify: what do paper rates mean?
So paper rates are, especially, well, I won't say for all customers, but customers are going to look at price, right? That's why there's an RFP and RFQ that they presented to you. So a paper rate is going to be a rate that is ultimately too low for you to cover it at the end of the day. It's important to look at a lane holistically, whether it is a 3-month bid, a 6-month, a yearly bid, and understand that there's ebbs and flows in the market. Now, no one has a crystal ball, but that's why it's so important to either go back to your carriers and say, what can you run this for year round comfortably? Or you can look, and obviously there's averages and different tools that you can look at to say, okay, well, this quarter, the rate is going to be, 7,000, but for the other 3 quarters, it's 5,000. If you put a paper rate of $5,000 down and then you give it back to them in that 1 quarter, that doesn't do a customer any good. So it's your job to look at it holistically and say, okay, well, maybe the average is this, or maybe I have a carrier that could run it at this. And know going into it that that's what you can run it for, and that's where you're going to be successful, not where you can win business for 3 months out of the year. That does not do a customer any good.
Yeah, I mean, like I know the paper rates really just kind of give brokers a bad name sometimes because they do approach it that way, and it's not good for you, it's not good for your customer, or even the carriers that you're relying on to service the business. Here, going back for a second to, like we talked about taking a targeted approach, like I'm a big fan of having pre-bid conversations with customers so you can learn where they need help, where they see you fitting in, like the value of incumbency, all sorts of little details like that. For you, like what kind of information do you like to have going into bids?
So I think of it, I think a lot of people say, where do you need help, right? And I take a different approach, and I say, this is what we're good at. This is what we can do. Obviously I'm going to look at the bid and say, okay, here's the lanes, right? 1,000 lanes. I don't want to say, where do you need help at, right? Because I may or may not be able to give them help on those lanes. I look at it from a different approach of, this is what we're good at. This is what we know we can service. And this is the carrier base we have. Now, that's not to say that you can't go out of network and try to find other carriers, but you can say, hey, pre-bid communication is important. And we have carriers, we run these lanes, we know the ebbs and the flows of this lane, and communicate that to them, not just put a rate down and say, here's our rate. Explain why the rate is that way. Customers are more up to give you freight and volume because they feel comfortable that, okay, well, this is a solid rate for the given period of time, instead of saying, okay, well, LGI or whomever put $3 a mile year round, and the next, the lowest is $2. Well, that $2 is only good for a certain period of time or a certain amount of quarters, and then they're just going to end up giving the freight back. The load goes on the spot market, and then, okay, well, we budgeted for this contracted rate through all of our lanes. Here's our freight spend, and then that goes out the window in Q4, and they're blowing their budget out. So it's super important to look at that holistically and understand that this is the rate that we can factually give it at, and communicate that to the customer.
Yeah, I like that point a lot about telling the customer what you're good at. I'm sure it makes conversations seem more authentic, if you will, if you're not asking them where they need help and then just spitting back out the same thing they just said. I really like that approach. And like you talked about pricing a little bit, so let's dig deeper into that for a second. What about pricing? It's different from quoting a single spot load. What are some things to watch out for from a pricing perspective?
Sure. So I always think of it in ebbs and flows, right? Or maybe like a wave. So as a broker, it's our job to ride the wave for the customer. We don't want to be drowning, and we don't want to be all the way, we don't want to be drowning. We don't want to be all the way above the wave, right? Yeah. We just want to have that steady line. And from a pricing standpoint, what that means is simply what I said, when you look at it holistically is, okay, our rate might be higher overall, but if you have to go back and say, hey, we need more money, or this is, not enough, then that rate, becomes inflated at the end of the day. So the $2 a mile rate may be good, but it's not going to be good for the whole year. And so I think it's super important when you look at it, pricing from a a larger standpoint, is that you look at it like you're riding a wave for the customer. They might not be happy within a certain quarter or a certain period of time for the rate that you have, but they know, and it's communicated up front, that hey, this price is the way it is because we know there is highs and lows within these markets or these lanes, and we're going to be able to ride that wave for you. And it gives time back to their employees and everybody else to say, okay, yes, it is a little bit higher, but when you think about man hours that have to go into it, putting it on the spot, getting rates back, and all the other ways that they can collect rates, it's super important. But just getting an RFP, putting a rate on it or a paper rate doesn't do anybody any good, because in the end, there's more work. So it's not just about the rate itself. It's about communicating why the rate is the way it is to the customer. And at the end of the day, if they don't want the rate and they just, they want to play the market or do whatever they want, that's up to them. But it's our job to communicate why the rates are the way they are.
I like that a lot. Let me ask you this. How do you communicate that to a customer? Is it, because I know a lot of brokers who they get the bid, they submit their rates, and that's kind of it. They just send them in and wash their hands of it and see what they win. Do you take a more proactive approach to actually having conversations with the prospect or the customer about your rates?
Sure. The customers that will allow you to do that, sure. You always want to, you don't want to send a lengthy email. It's always best to maybe get on the phone, or, I've scheduled conference calls and said, hey, here's what we're good at. Here's the lanes we're interested in, right? And I know that's hard to do on larger bids, but really just kind of give them an understanding of what you can do, so they understand when they start to look at the bid, okay, you know what, I feel comfortable with this rate, right? I feel comfortable. So you can't do it on a lane by lane basis generally. But if you give them an overview and say, here's the markets we're strong in, or I have carriers that run this specific lane we're interested in these lanes, you say you have a volume of 100 a year, well, we can actually provide you with 200. And then that gets their head spinning, and they can start to look at different things like, okay, well, if they can do 200 out of this DC or this vendor per se, then we may be able to pull that from another vendor because this vendor is a cheaper cost, and it saves them money in the end. So pricing is not just thinking about the exact rate that you're looking at. It's about thinking about the labor that you can save them. It's about the cost savings that you can save them by moving things around, being that strategic partner with them instead of just saying, here's my rates, have at it. Some customers will not get on the phone, and that's okay. But, you know, a quick email to help them understand why your bids are the way they are is super important. I encourage it on any RFP, whether it's 10 lanes or 10,000 lanes.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to have a strategic approach. I like that you phrased it that way. Like throughout our conversation today, we've kind of talked about carriers a little bit, just kind of tangentially being related to rates. And obviously your rates are only as good as your ability to cover freight with carriers. So let's talk about that for just a quick second. What about developing your carrier base? How do you source for it? How is it different from sourcing for transactional lanes? Like how deep should your network be? These are a lot of super vague questions. They're really generic. So like any random thoughts on that?
Sure. So, I mean, you always want to be building that carrier base, no matter what lane you're doing, if it's a spot or a contractual lane. But I think it's really about, you know, when the carrier sales or your sourcing team, whoever, you're selling them the whole pie, right? Not just a piece of the pie. You want to say, okay, well, I have these lanes, I have the ability to get more, right? And then source that way. And when you do that, the carriers are more apt to come to you and say, hey, what freight do you have? I have trucks for you, right? That's sourcing new capacity. Now within your network, right, whether it's small or big, you really just need to talk to your carriers and say, what are you interested in? And it doesn't matter if it's on a sticky note or you have the best technology out there, whatever you need to do, it's really all about the relationship with the carrier, keeping their trucks running, keeping the deadhead down, and building that network around your freight. When you do it, how you do it, everybody can do it a different way. So I don't have a tired and true approach. There's multiple ways, once again, to skin that cat. But I think really at the end of the day, the relationships in this industry go a long way, and they will supersede technology and a lot of different things. I will probably get a lot of haters that tell me I'm wrong, but the relationships at the end of the day, they will supersede. So I think it's important to really, you know, talk to your carriers and see what they want and really work with them, because at the end of the day, they're a customer too.
Yeah, I don't think you'll get a lot of hate for that. You know, like I'm a guy who talks about technology a lot, but I mean, my point of view is technology is just there to kind of enable people to have better relationships. It's not there to take their place.
Very true.
So no, I think that's a great point. So like, as we wrap up here, this series is all about industry education, and I'd like to kind of tie things up at the end by asking people, what's something that you've learned recently?
Sure. So something I've learned, you know, when we're growing and hiring is to, you know, I guess, let me take a step back. When you're looking at the age dynamic within our industry, it's changing, and it's changing a lot. I don't have statistics. That's just my personal opinion. And there's a lot of new generations and younger kids coming into our industry. And one of the things that, you know, I'm starting to learn is listen to what they have to say, right? They're very connected. They stay in touch with a lot of things. And, you know, before, you know, I wouldn't say I was guarded, but, you know, I wouldn't want to listen as much. And now I'm learning to listen more and talk less. And I think it's super important, especially with that younger generation coming in. They have a lot of great ideas. They have a lot of new ways of doing things. And just because it's my way doesn't have to mean it's the highway, right? So really listen to this younger generation coming into our industry. They can teach us a lot.
No, I think that's great advice for anybody in management or anybody interacting with other people for that matter.
Yep.
Like really, like all of that was great advice. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. We're intentionally keeping these short so they're quick and digestible, but the industry is very complicated. They're complex subjects, and there's always more to learn. So like Josh, if someone wants to reach out to you, how do they do it?
Sure. So you can go to lgiinc.com or my email if you'd like, jcale@lgiinc.com.
All right. Thanks for being on today, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from you and the group at LGI.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate your time.